and to give a little bit more perspective on exactly what the President's been up to and to talk in depth about Medicaid, I want to hand it over to someone who knows candidate Obama and President Obama very, very well, someone who served as a co-chair of Obama for America in 2008, and someone who also served alongside of Congressman Paul Ryan. It's with great pleasure I introduce Virginia's own Congressman Artur Davis.
Thank you, Pete. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I am so unaccustomed to clapping at a press conference, I think I'm lost. Pete, thank you so much for your comments, and Delegate Comstock is here as well. For those who happen not to know, the two people who are quarterbacking the Virginia campaign are the lady standing in the back, who you'll have a chance to meet and greet later, and the gentleman who spoke before me, and we're so thankful for what they do, Barbara Comstock and Pete Snyder, and make sure you know them, all the Virginians in the room. Pete, I want to expand on your observations by putting this conversation about Medicare and our seniors in context. Anytime you become a candidate for office, anytime you organize a campaign, ladies and gentlemen, you have a fundamental choice to make at the outset about how you discuss the issues and how you discuss your opponent. You can aim high at our aspirations, or you can aim low at our fears. You can choose to breed either hope or cynicism. In case you think that what I just said sounds familiar to you, it should. All I'm saying is something that Senator Barack Obama said in Boston in 2004 when he came on the scene. All I'm doing is more or less repeating the way Senator Barack Obama talked about politics all over America in the course of 2008. Cynicism or hope? It's a powerful insight. If only it had survived Senator Obama becoming President Obama. I want to give you some examples of what I mean in the context of Medicare at first. When the Obama campaign claims through its surrogates and its messaging that seniors will have their Medicare, and for some of you, your Medicare, ripped away from you. And how many times have we heard that in this campaign from the Obama crowd to the seniors in the room, that they're going to take Medicare away from you, they being the Republicans. When the Obama campaign peddles that message, and they know full well that the Ryan plan does not affect anyone in America on Medicare right now or anyone under 54. When they spread a message of the kind they've spread, and they know better, they're breeding cynicism and not hope. When the Obama campaign savages the congressman who I served with for 8 years and Governor Romney and says that they're the ones who will weaken Medicare with cuts and reductions, and they know full well that they finance their health care law 70% of the way with cuts in Medicare. 70% of how Obamacare is paid for is cuts in Medicare that affect those of you in this room who are seniors today, not in the future, not some point down the horizon, but right now. When the Obama campaign says that the Romney-Ryan ticket will debilitate Medicare, and they know how they paid for their program, they're breeding cynicism and not hope. And let me be blunt. When the Obama campaign acts as if we can sustain Medicare the way it is without changes, and they know full well that every neutral expert in this country says a train wreck is coming with respect to Medicare if we don't act now, the Obama campaign is breeding cynicism and not hope. And the cynicism, as far as Congressman Ryan goes, didn't start this week. You may think it started with the moment that he walked to the stage in Norfolk and joined the ticket on Saturday in our state. It didn't start then, though. started in the spring of 2011 when President Obama went to one of our leading universities in Washington, D.C., and appeared to do Congressman Ryan the gesture of courtesy by inviting him to come and even set him on the front row. For those of you who've been to a Baptist church, front row is a big deal. And then after putting the man on the front row and implicitly saying to him, come and join me so we can talk about how to build bridges together, the president turns, gestures toward him, looks at him, and lectures him that he, Congressman Ryan, was not being a good American and that his plan fell short of American values. Some bridge. And as Pete Snyder alluded, cynicism didn't start with Medicare. You saw it in a shameless ad that sought to make political profit off a woman's death. An ad so shameless that a Democratic former senator named Evan Bayh, who was nearly selected as Barack Obama's running mate 4 years ago, has denounced it and said that Democrats ought to distance themselves from it. And as Pete Snyder found out yesterday in Danville, Virginia, the cynicism this week just won't stop. You've all seen the tape. The vice president of our country standing in front of a crowd that was at least 50% African American, looking at them and turning to them and saying, they're going to put y'all back in chains. If I can be direct, I've spoken to a few African American audiences in my day. Every African American in that audience knew who the y'all was, and every African American in that audience knew what buttons he was trying to push by talking about chains. And interestingly, politicians are funny when they get caught. When people heard Vice President Biden's comments and called him on it, the Obama campaign has been in backpedal mode for the last so many hours. They've said, oh, when he was talking about chains, he just meant economic times. Politicians talk about chains all the time. Ladies and gentlemen, they're adding an insult to our intelligence to the insult they made to the civil discourse. People in that room knew what the vice president meant. And I will say this, it is to the credit of the African Americans in that room that if you actually watch the tape, you actually don't hear a lot of applause when Biden made his comments. You hear what appeared to be some boos and some shock. So it's to the credit of the people there that they understood him very well and rejected what they heard. Doesn't lift him up, but it lifts them up. So, as I bring our last guest, Jane Gandy, forward, I want to end with this. Chicago does not plan to stop the cynicism. The White House doesn't plan to stop this cynicism. You know why? Because they think it will work. And you kind of get them. If you ran 4 years ago and told conservative voters in Virginia and North Carolina you were going to cut the deficit in half, and you submitted 4 $1 trillion a year deficit budgets, if you promised that unemployment was going to be at 7.5% if they passed your stimulus package, and unemployment has been over 8% for 43 consecutive months now, if you promise to bring the country together and it's more divided than ever, you get my drift. If everything you promised turned upside down, you might try to do a little bit of dividing too if you were just a politician. But you know what the shame of it is, ladies and gentlemen? How many of us believed 4 years ago that Barack Obama was not just a politician? How many Americans invested their hope that he was more and that his presidency would mean more? We may not have the power to stop it, They'll run their campaign the way they want. But the American people have the power to punish it. And they can punish it by saying, if I can quote the president, "Not this time." Thank you all. May I introduce James Andy now.
Doctors keep working to treat people on Medicare when Medicare, one, doesn't pay their bills, and two, will be less able to pay their bills with what Obamacare is doing to the system.
You ask a very important question. I say that not to flatter you, but you put your finger on something that most people missed about the Affordable Care Act 2 years ago. The Affordable Care Act is kind of right around $1 trillion in terms of its cost. 70% of it, maybe upper 60s, but upper 60s, 70% of it is paid for by cutting Medicare. Let me say that again. They paid for an act that most of the American people didn't want and that most seniors didn't want by taking money out of today's Medicare pot. And every doctor who services a Medicare population knows it. And to your point, doctors, good doctors all over Northern Virginia, good doctors all over this state and all over this country are no longer participating in the Medicare program because this is something we miss sometimes. How did they cut Medicare? The administration said 2 years ago that, oh, we're making changes, we're instituting some savings and cost-cutting provisions. Well, that sounds well and good, right? The saving and the cost-cutting provision is they took money out of the Medicare pot that goes to doctors. And I remember people in my old party, the Democratic Party, who would say with a straight face, oh, we're not cutting Medicare, we're just cutting money going to those rich doctors. What do they think happens when you cut fees to doctors? They stop providing services.
Mine cut me.
And in addition to doctors, and your doctor's a good doc, but he made that decision because guess what? Every doctor is a small business person. Now let me slip in one other point here. This commission that was appointed that the Democrats didn't want to talk about because it didn't poll well 2 years ago, they appointed this commission that to this day nobody can tell you who's on it. They don't have public meetings. The administration loved to brag about transparency. At one point they had said they'd offer to write the bill on C-SPAN. Well, that'll put this commission on C-SPAN because the commission gets to sit down and decide procedure by procedure where cuts ought to happen, with Congress having no say, with you having no say, with the grassroots communities and the doctors having no say. So it's bad business for the country. It's incredibly difficult business for doctors, and you put your finger on something a lot of people have missed about it. Make this the last question.
Okay. What are the chances of Romney and Ryan, pray that they get in office, what are their chances of turning this around?
Well, you know, sometimes we're in Virginia, so we're not in Washington, D.C., which means the air is better here and everything. When you get around that air in Washington, D.C., you know what y'all hear over and over again? You hear over and over again, presidents can't get anything done. It's tough being president. When you're president, people start being mean to you and they try to block your proposals. You would almost think that the separation of powers was a partisan trick invented 4 years ago just to mess with Barack Obama. You would think Jefferson Madison had nothing to do with it. The way this system works is leaders do matter if leaders can summon the country to follow them and if they're able to frankly work with the other side. And isn't this the first president we've seen, ladies and gentlemen, in our lifetimes who hasn't one time on one issue figured out how to work with the other side? On all of his legislative proposals that passed, not one time did he figure out how to bring any Republicans into his tent. Kennedy and Johnson and Clinton and Carter and Bush and Reagan all figured it out. It's hard, but it can't be that hard if every one of them figured it out. So I think they can fix it, because let me say one thing about Congressman Ryan, because I did serve with him for 8 years on 2 committees. Congressman Ryan, in the time he's been in public life, has accomplished more in terms of productivity and legislative smarts than anybody else in his political generation. And yes, with no offense intended to our president, President Obama was in public life for roughly 12 years before he became president. Paul Ryan, public life for 14 years before he makes the national ticket. Barack Obama wrote 2 books but passed no laws. Paul Ryan, it so happens, crafted a document that has become the signature document on budget reduction in this country. He's not a chairman. He doesn't have any special status. He's a fairly junior member of Congress. Paul Ryan's leadership record, ma'am, shows me that a leader with talent and ability and a commitment to getting things done and not just talking can make things happen. And don't we know that that's Governor Romney's story too? Folks, if you can run Massachusetts and you're a Republican, you prove you can run anything.